You're listening to the EndoCast, a podcast about all things endometriosis, with your hosts, Britt Thelman-Pangrel and Dr. Eric Heegard. Hey guys, it's Britt, and I'm back here with my pal, Dr. Heegard. How's it going?
It's going great. It's wonderful to be here talking about something we're both passionate about.
I know, and we're passionate about endometriosis.
That's right.
Which, there should be a song.
Yes.
I think if we had a song, it might be easier to explain endometriosis to our friends and family, like something kind of jingly, and maybe they'd get on board, but either way.
Something to think about.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll have to come up with that.
Mm-hmm.
But today we are going to talk about getting your family up to speed, talking to your friends and family about endometriosis and helping them understand kind of what this disease is all about.
Right. And I think this is going to swing back to a certain extent about talking about advocating for yourself.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times people with this condition, with this disease, unless they are in a family that maybe has experienced it, different members have experienced it themselves, and they're comfortable about talking about these symptoms, a lot of times, and this may be your situation as well, but many of my patients and the people I've talked to there's a lot of isolation related to it because they don't know who to talk to. It's not something maybe they talk about very comfortably at home. And so the young woman or the person who with periods.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm working on this, Brett.
You're on board.
It's they oftentimes are educating themselves and advocating for themselves to understand what this condition is
At the same time.
and so
Yeah.
you have to know what you're at. A person needs to know what they suspect is going on before they can start communicating.
Well, and I think that's what makes it so hard. So if you're someone who thinks you might be struggling with endometriosis out there, or you have it, and maybe you've struggled to talk about it with your friends and family, this might be a really good episode to share.
Right.
Because our goal is to try to get everyone on your team.
Yes.
And I have to just say personally, it's really isolating and you feel crazy. You do. And you don't need someone else to tell you you're crazy, because that little voice in the back of your head that second guesses everything you're doing is telling you you're crazy and it can't be that bad and you're overreacting. I mean, She's doing it for me, so I don't necessarily need other people to tell me. And then when you hear it from an outside person, it can be harder. So I think half of the battle is a little bit self-actualizing, like, okay, I probably have this.
Yeah.
And really identifying your symptoms and being honest with yourself, first of all, like, okay, when is this pain happening? If it's pain, in your case, is it pain with sex? And, what kind of sex are you having that could be contributing to your pain?
Right.
Is it pain around your period? I'm not a huge journal person because I think they take up a lot of time. But when I was starting to understand my own body and what was going on, I started journaling, even just simple dates, right?
Yeah.
You'll know if you go to the gynecologist that they ask you every time you go, what's the first day of your last menstrual period? And I feel like most millennial people with periods out there are like me, where they have to like scroll through their phone and find where they like marked like Shark Week on their calendar or something. But it really helps if you can kind of get some sort of semblance on yourself first. So self-awareness, I think, is key. Yeah. Understanding your body, keeping track of that stuff. I mean, it helps when you go to the doctor too, right? Having your symptoms written down.
Absolutely. And I'll just add on to that. What symptoms do you have? When do they happen? Yeah. And in as much detail as you can get, really. And also, if you're coming to see, somebody who focuses on this stuff, to have some sort of linear chronological set of events. If you've been on certain medications, if you've had surgery, if you've had different diagnoses, et cetera, when did it start, who did it, what was found, et cetera. When you bring that into one of us, and we can look at it and go, oh, that is really helpful.
Yeah. So sit down and prepare.
Right.
Take some time to prepare for your appointment, get your ducks in a row, get your timeline in order. I would agree with you wholeheartedly. That really helped with my big appointment. Yeah. before going into surgery and stuff was kind of nailing all that in. And then I think too, once you put the pieces together, for yourself, and you get your doctor involved, it's a little bit easier, I think, then to talk to your family. Because
Right.
you're not the only person anymore.
Right. Let me ask you this. Did you, and I'm sorry, I don't remember, you probably mentioned this, but how long was it, if you look back from the time you were diagnosed, in retrospect, do you say, okay, yeah, I had these symptoms, and which I realized were endometriosis when I look back? Did that happen to you?
Yes. I would say, looking back at when I first got my period, I was late into 15, almost 16 when I got my period, and it was pretty painful. And my mom reminds me now, hindsight, right? Oh, yeah, you had a really painful period, or you didn't want to go to school, or you were kind of out that whole week. But I was in a house where you toughened it out. My mom's a dentist, and she's a medical professional, and she's like, well, unless you're running a fever, you're going to school kind of person, which was great. It taught me a lot. But at the same time, I think that there are some people who get that message and they can't tough it out. Like, I think my pain was something I could work with. It wasn't until I got to college that it was really debilitating, and I had that ovarian cyst burst, and that's when I started seeing a gynecologist too. And that's the first time I heard endometriosis come up, but they were always scaring me with it. It was like, well, it could be endometriosis, dun dun dun, and be afraid, and your options are get pregnant, which, when you're 19 is not an option. So that's a ridiculous thing to say to someone. Or have surgery, but surgery creates more scars, so you probably don't want to do that. And like, this is what me and my mom are hearing. And I'm like, okay. Or you can go on birth control. And it's like, oh, okay, here's this option.
Yeah.
And so that's obviously the option we took. But now, farther along in my journey, I realize that those aren't our options, and that, surgery often is the best option for people.
Right.
And that pregnancy and hysterectomy are not cures for endometriosis. But that was some of the early information I was given. Right. And it was presented as this scary thing. I mean, it is scary. It's a chronic disease, but people live well with endo all the time, myself included. Yep. And I think knowledge is power, and just knowing that you have it and is another tool in your belt, because it can help you identify everything else that's going on. So
Did you have other people in your family that had endometriosis?
No.
See, this is the thing that is kind of hard, is that if you have somebody who's already had the diagnosis, I think everybody's more alert to it.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, you may be the first person who's actually has brutal periods or pain, and maybe the other women who are close to you don't. I don't know if that's your situation.
Well, it's funny because when all of this finally came out, no one said that they were having it. But then as we look back, like, I lost an aunt to cervical cancer, but she didn't want to go to the gynecologist for like 9-10 years because it was painful.
Oh, yeah.
And that reads more into, okay, so maybe she did have endo and stuff. And then I recently lost my grandma to peritoneal cancer, ovarian cancer, which, maybe there was some evidence there of endometriosis, and I need to just get in there and look at that stuff. And even my own mother has said to me, her periods were really bad until she got pregnant, and then it was better. Yeah. So no, we don't know. There is a history of pelvic pain in my family and of gynecological disease, which I know can point back, but you're right. It's tricky.
Well, it's just, I'm just saying this from talking to a lot of patients and their families, that, like what happened with you is like you get diagnosed and everybody's like, oh yeah, now that because it becomes the normal. Like, this is just maybe in your family, people have pretty painful periods or maybe really painful periods. And that becomes just the baseline. And, most of us can't compare our pain to somebody else.
Right.
And so it just maybe in a lot of families, it may be just, this is the way it is for everybody. And they just kind of assume that everybody else has got it. Or many times it might be that you have these horrible periods and pain, but the other women in your family don't have it at all.
Right.
And so what you talked about, this idea of feeling like you're going crazy, and everybody starts, in some families, in my experience at least, everybody starts to feel like they're going crazy. The woman who's having the symptoms, the person with periods,
Yeah.
starts to feel like, that they're going crazy because nobody else can understand because they don't experience it. And the people around this person who are hopefully trying to be understanding and supportive, they start to feel like they're crazy, or the person they care about is exaggerating.
Right, they're worried about their mental health.
Yeah, right. And so everybody starts to feel like they are, they don't know what's going on. And I think that you mentioned the isolation it's so painful for people and families if they're trying to understand this. How did you? I'm just out of curiosity. So, what resources did you use to educate yourself?
Yeah, well, because I think that is step one. You kind of have to bone up on your disease first before you bring other people into the fold. And I use the internet a lot, and I use the Endometriosis Foundation of America. They have a lot of great resources on their website. I'm a big fan of Top Chef, and Padma Lakshmi, who's one of their spokespeople, and she's the host of the show, has talked about her disease and
co-founder of the Endometriosis Foundation.
She is. And then
the
book that really helped me was Dr. Sechkin's book, The Doctor Will See You Now. And I listened to it. I guess I like podcasts and listening to things, but I listened to it, and it was the first time in my life that someone was explaining what I was feeling.
Right.
And and that book is wonderful. He has a great way of explaining these symptoms and talking about specific cases with patients where it kind of clicked. It clicked for me for the first time. Oh, yes, it is cyclical. My pain is happening around my period or when I'm ovulating. The times that I have trouble or pain with a bowel movement is around my period. Oh, that makes sense. Or I am having pain with sex, but it's worse around, ovulation, which is really unfortunate.
Right.
Just saying, like if you're trying to get pregnant. So that was the first time I had ever read something or listened to something where it was like, this person gets me. And that was a tool that I personally used that I think is a great tool for other people. I gave that book to my family, and I said, I want you to listen to this.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Even if you don't read the whole thing, even if you're just listening to bits and pieces or reading certain chapters of it, it's so nice because you can go a little crazy trying to explain your own story to someone and get them on board. But when a medical professional establishes like the exact same story that they've found in 10% of the population, right? 1 in 10 people with periods, it makes you a little less crazy.
And so, how old were you when you got the book, for example?
30.
Yeah. So
like 29.
The thing that is a tragedy, and I'm going to speak for both of us, but I think we both feel this way, which is that you're 30 years old. At this point, you are, you are your own person. You are an adult. You have life experience, and knowing you as a person, and you are a powerful personality, and it's good. And you're somebody who will advocate for yourself. That's, at least I think that, and you're intelligent, you know where to find resources. But the tragedy to me is that it took you until 30 before you were really ready. A 13 or 14-year-old, this is where I think the real tragedy is, because again, they may be embarrassed to talk about it. Their family may not have experience with it. They don't know that this is not normal. They start to think that they're complainers and themselves are,
Right.
And so how do we get the message out that this is not normal? And, one of the things that we both know about, but we got to get into middle schools. We got to, and talking to teenagers. And so they know that this kind of pain is not normal.
Well, and I think
somebody
it's
else telling them that.
No matter what your gender is, to know about this disease and know that this pain isn't normal.
Yeah.
Because it affects 1 in 10 people with periods. So it doesn't matter if you identify as female or not. And even if if you weren't born with female reproductive organs, I can think of middle school boys going home and telling their mothers, hey, this and bringing that up and how important
that's a great point.
is.
Yeah. But if everybody's talking, if everybody knows about it and is alert to it, we could save a lot of suffering, Britt.
Right. So, I mean, I'm our nonprofit, the Minnesota Endo Warriors, that I'm currently the president of, has been working with the School Nurses Association here in Minnesota, which is so wonderful because school nurses can be great advocates. But what's hard is, we were at their conference last year and all these nurses would come up and we would say, oh, are you dealing with students that might have endometriosis? And they'll say to us, no, that doesn't really apply to us. Oh, well, what age group? Where are you a school nurse? And if they say that they work with kindergartners and, lower elementary schoolers, I might say, yeah, don't worry about it. But it was the individuals who work with middle schoolers telling us that they didn't need to worry about it, where
I know. That's
you
where
politely grab their hand and you're like, no.
This is when you need to worry about it.
This is like you're in the prime spot. And actually, kids are getting their periods earlier and earlier. So it's not bad if you're, an elementary school teacher or nurse to know about this too. And they start those, we called it family life at our Catholic elementary school, but the sex talk videos.
Family life.
Like, I think if you're talking about reproductive organs and diseases and things, endometriosis should be in there. And arming our school nurses so that they can say, hey, it looks like your child got their period and they've been missing a lot of school. I just want to let you know these are some local endometriosis resources, or here is a book about this. You might want to just research it a little, because what we like to say to students and school nurses is missing school and having to change your lifestyle every month around your period isn't normal.
Right.
And it's hard to quantify pain and compare pain. But if you've got a student that's, bleeding really heavily and they're having to miss class and they're always bleeding through tampons and pads, like, don't wait. It isn't just a weird, because people are always like, oh, your period's weird when you start. Yeah, but that's not normal.
Right. And so, that excites me when I hear that sort of conversation happening, because if we can intervene, if we can get people to have awareness at that level, then we can help this person who's suffering these symptoms be able to maybe advocate for themselves with their family, to communicate with some of the resources you're talking about.
Yeah, and so we want to arm people with ways to do that, right? It can be really difficult when you're an adolescent or a young teenager and you're trying to talk about these things. But again, talking about it in the perspective of, I'm down for the count. I'm laying on my floor. My best friend is a heating pad and I'm taking too much Advil. Nothing can control this. It's not normal. And I think if you're someone who's in that position and you're looking for resources, the book with Dr. Sechkin is great, and you can get it from a library if you want and read it yourself and then point out a few chapters. Or there are so many great websites. The Center for Endometriosis Care has a lot of, the Endometriosis Foundation. They both have a lot of great information, and you can print out articles. And I would, especially if you're under 18, it might be a really great way to present the information to your family, because no, you're not an expert. You're not a medical expert.
Right.
But if you can present this to them and maybe underline a few things that really speak to you, I'd say stay away from Wikipedia or WebMD. People don't always like to believe those resources, but the Mayo Clinic's website is pretty good. And then if you're on Facebook, our favorite resource is
Nancy's Nook.
Yes, it's the Nancy's Endometriosis Education Nook is what it's listed as on Facebook. And in there are a ton of great articles. I think she even has one on talking to your family or talking to loved ones about endo, and then in turn, how to talk to your doctor about your symptoms.
Right.
And again, a lot of these resources are free, or you can access them for free, like with a library card. But it is important. I think the best way to get your family on the same page is to put the words in someone else's mouth sometimes.
Right.
Because then they can make the correlation with you. You've already told them your side of the story. But if you provide some like medical evidence or an author or an example of someone else who's been through this, they can make that correlation.
Right. I think that's a very powerful message, because I think that, at least in my experience, there's this odd reaction that can happen when somebody gets validated, where you come out and you talk to the family and you say, Because as you had mentioned in one of our other podcasts, that you were afraid that they wouldn't find something,
Right.
right? And so a lot of times there's this real apprehension on the part of the patient, the person who's suffering these symptoms, and their family. They don't know what's going to, they're afraid that they're not going to find something. And then you come out and you show them the pictures, and whole families will start weeping.
Yeah.
At times, because they, number one, they feel like, okay, we've got a diagnosis, but also sometimes there's this sense of just profound guilt on the people who love them and have been wondering themselves whether they were exaggerating. And it's really hard. And you can have the most well-meaning support around you that can start to feel like they're going insane.
Mm-hmm.
The person with the symptoms feels like they're going insane. And they start to doubt their own feelings and experience on both sides. At least that's been my observation. And what I would like, and I is that doesn't have to happen anymore. Well, if we can, give younger people the tools so they can get the information, advocate for themselves. So we're not talking about it 10 years later, 15 years later.
And I feel like more and more I'm meeting young people who are willing to do that.
Yeah.
And then another group of people that I think are really struggling are the people more in my age group, right? Like late 20s, 30s, 40s even, where they're just realizing that this might be what it is.
Right.
And they're not bringing their family up to speed. And I would say you're doing yourself a disservice. And I think sometimes we do that out of self-preservation because maybe your family is more skeptical, or I've been accused of using Dr. Google and been told to listen to my own doctor from a family member in the past.
Yep.
And I'll tell you, that's really hard, but also not having a support system and not building that community around you is even harder.
Right.
So it is worth, in my perspective and opinion, it's worth bringing them on board. Recently, someone was asking me if I'd ever brought a family member to a doctor's appointment. And I'm like, well, I bring my husband to almost all of them. Mm-hmm. But my mother and my mother-in-law were both at my surgery and available afterward. And they heard from the horse's mouth, from Dr. Palmer, this is where we found it. This is what she has. And obviously I said that it was okay, from a HIPAA perspective, that he could share that. But it's really helped to build community. And I hear so often, I think the people that I talk to a lot in our support groups who are still really struggling is they haven't created a great community around themselves. Right. And especially if you don't live in our metro area where we meet and we're just doing these support groups online, you need someone in your inner circle who understands. And it can be difficult to talk about this, and maybe you don't want to overshare. Maybe you are a really private person and you've gone through your whole life and you've been doing just fine this way. But if your family doesn't understand and they don't respect that you're in pain, so you might need to cancel plans, like with friends and family, or you've changed your diet now, and here you're preparing for the holidays, and they're frustrated that you can't eat the pie because it has gluten in it, or now you're dairy free, or you're not doing alcohol. If you're making life changes, which I encourage you to do to support your diagnosis, you got to loop your family in so they can support you. Otherwise, you're creating an island.
Right.
And those are the people that I find struggle the most with their diagnosis.
Yes. And
because they feel the most isolated.
Right. Important stuff, Britt.
And it's expensive too. I will say that as well. Any medical condition can be really expensive. And when you might be looking at, for people that don't live really close to their doctor and you have to travel, or maybe you're doing physical therapy, or you're getting some sort of mental help from a therapist or something, which I highly recommend. That stuff's expensive, and communicating even with your job, if it's possible, and your HR department on how you can weave some of that in. I know some people that might work for family members and maybe they're nannies or things. And I had this one girl tell me, well, I can't take any time off because I'm the nanny and I have to be able to pick the baby up. And I'm like, you're having major abdominal surgery. Like, you need to tell your family you're not allowed to pick up that 20-pound cute little chunk right now because you physically can't lift anything. But she didn't want to share this with them.
Right.
And I know that it's hard, but you have to share. You have to you have to kind of get over that hurdle of this is your disease, because it really does affect the people around you. And if you want them to be on the same page as you and believe your pain and support you when you need time off or time away, you've got to share.
Yep. I agree.
So do you find that a lot of patients bring family members to appointments?
Yeah, they do. Again, I think that's probably my experience with patients and families may be skewed because, again, most of the time I'm seeing a patient, they've been going through this for a while, and so hopefully they have somebody, a support person who's with them. Probably if you're a primary care for provider of some sort, maybe that's not as common because they haven't gotten to the point where they're perhaps reaching out to in frustration to everybody. But in my experience is that they oftentimes, I would say just off the top of my head, over 50% of the time they come in with somebody else, a friend or
That's
a
good.
parent. I have this one patient whose father, in particular, came to just virtually every appointment. He was the sweetest guy.
What a cool relationship.
Yeah, I just think, and it's not super common, but it happens enough where you just think it's just so inspiring to see that that sometimes I think that we all assume that there's kind of these gender perhaps barriers for reaching out, and maybe there are, but to see a father coming with his child and to every visit, every surgery, everything is just it's beautiful to watch that kind of support.
No, for sure. And I think especially I was just thinking why someone might not want to talk to their family about endo, and painful periods is, in my mind, that's an easy one.
Right.
But if your primary symptom is pain with intercourse, and number one, that's not something that you like, I don't know. I did not have the relationship with my mom where we would just like sat and talked about our sex lives together.
Right.
So
I'm not sure that is super common, but
right. So that might be a really hard one. If that's your primary symptom, that could be very difficult to talk to your family about. And I still think that it's worth it. You got to figure out some way to share that information. And that can be hard if you're, depending on what their perception might be on your sexual activity and where you are in your life. And you kind of got to get over that part of it and just be like, listen, first of all, I've been sexually active and this is a problem that I'm having. And what can be hard is, and hopefully if you're a loved one listening to this, is just keep listening. Get over the initial fact that you're shocked or surprised by however they start, but then hear about the problem first and, help them get help. And I think that that's where a lot of people can feel so isolated because some of these symptoms are awkward and weird. And I mean, the sex one I think is the most awkward to discuss, but maybe I'm just more open about my bowel issues than other people.
Yeah, right. And again, those are things that are, when people are...
Pain when you're having to poop every month, like that is not fun to talk about.
Yeah, every month. So once a month, poop?
Yeah, no. I mean,
maybe that's what's causing your pain.
Yeah, it could be. No,
I will pooping a whale out.
I will say that symptom has gotten far better, but it wasn't. I just mean like pain during your cycle.
I understand
when you have to poop.
I got it.
And I know poop is not the medical word, but it's more fun to say.
Yes.
But like that might be a symptom that I'd be more comfortable sharing with my mom, but maybe not with my partner.
Right.
Right, because nothing is sexy about pooping.
Yeah, right.
So I think that like depending on who your audience is, it could be more difficult to share certain symptoms, but that doesn't mean it's not important. And you got to figure out a way to talk about it and get over the initial awkwardness of it. Do it. You can do it. I believe in you.
Right.
And just share. And then, don't be afraid to, I like these ideas. Bring them to an appointment.
Right.
Introduce them to some of these resources online or from books or this podcast. Who knows?
Right.
I'll talk about all the awkward stuff for you. Okay.
Yeah, very excellent.
You can be like, Mom, you got to hear this girl. She's talking about poop and like painful sex. Isn't that wild?
Exactly. Shed the light.
I'm doing it
Open
for
the curtains
you.
on this. Yeah. That is what I think is so, I'm so excited about this podcast, Brett, is what you can do, and I can help, is to do that. Open the curtains on this, shed some light, and hopefully make people feel less isolated and informed.
And I think too, from that perspective, we want to remain really positive. So just because you have endometriosis or you think you might have it,
right,
and you're in that diagnosis phase, doesn't mean that it's a death sentence. I think that's so important. And that's why some people shy away from getting a diagnosis, because they're afraid.
Yep.
But I mean, I'm still standing tall here and rocking this out. And I think get the information, share the information, and then come up with a battle plan together. And that's where I think looping your family in can be so helpful and bringing them to these appointments, because now they're not just reading, okay, 1 in 10 people with periods have this. It takes 7 to 10 doctors to get diagnosed and 9 years on average. You're not just a stat anymore.
Right.
The doctors, hopefully, if they're good, and if you need a list of good ones, let me know. If they're good, they're going to come to you with a plan of action. Right. And I think that's where you as the doctor can be so powerful, and bringing your, the parents to that appointment. Like, what are some things that you share in these appointments where families and individuals can kind of help themselves deal with this diagnosis?
Well, let me just add on to that a little bit, which is some people, you had mentioned that you may be more comfortable talking to your parent about pain with bowel movements. Let's say I'll make it more bowel movements. With moving your bowels, as they used to say 100 years ago. But you might be more comfortable talking to, your partner about pain with intercourse, or maybe a sister or a friend,
right,
or a brother for that matter. And so, I would encourage that it's nice to be able to have a parent come, but maybe you're more comfortable having a friend, or a sister, someone who can be another set of ears, community. And somebody who can take notes for you, because information, there can be information overload. Mm-hmm. And most people can only absorb so much. And as you said, sometimes there's this overwhelming sense of panic as you get a diagnosis and that sort of thing. And so, but there's a lot of, ideally in the perfect circumstance, there's a lot of information going back and forth. And for a family member or a loved one to be hearing what the practitioner or physician is saying in terms of recommendations, whether it be lifestyle recommendations, the plan. Mm-hmm. How are we going to diagnose this? If we find what we think we're going to find, what is going to be our course of action? Yes, that I think is some of the most useful information that someone who's around the person with these symptoms can help them keep track of. Yeah. So what are some of those maybe lifestyle or other recommendations aside from surgery? Right. That you would tell people, and I think is good for families to hear? Well, I think that number one, to just give them some support about the fact that this is real. Yep. And that there may be some sort of accommodations that everybody, and you had mentioned it, Britt, when you make a lifestyle change. And maybe now, lifestyle changes, for example, and some people find that their diet makes a huge difference. And there's a thing called the endometriosis diet, which it's not like a fad diet or a book or something. Yeah, it's a very hard. Yeah, right. It's not like the South Beach. It's not like the North Beach diet. But these things can be helpful. Some people really notice a difference if they avoid something, gluten or dairy. Some people, it doesn't really make a difference, but I think that most of us believe that some sort of anti-inflammatory diet, however you want to define it, can be helpful to some extent, and some people immensely helpful. Mm-hmm. Things like mind-body things, like meditation and yoga and just exercise, things that just make a person feel alive and vigorous and like they feel like their body is less of an enemy. Yeah. Because I think that some people feel like their body has betrayed them, which I think, would be an understandable feeling. And so when you're talking about things like that, when you're talking about resources, where you can go, you had mentioned the Endometriosis Foundation, the Center for Endometriosis Care, Nancy's Nook, the Endometriosis Association, Minnesota Endo Warriors. There's Endo Warrior, there's different support groups in different states and regions. And so these are things that somebody can be, taking notes on And so accommodations, lifestyle changes, being supportive of somebody's difficulty with maybe missing events or
knowing
work.
their limits.
Right. That this is, and I don't need to tell you this, but it is a systemic, meaning it doesn't just affect your ovary or your pelvis, but it's an inflammatory condition that affects the whole body to some extent for most people. And so a lot of people have fatigue. Virtually everybody has fatigue. When your body's fighting, it gets tired. And to be aware, and I think for people around them to be aware that that's happening, that there's a battle going on inside this person's body that's going on all the time, that they to be aware of that, and I think it helps.
Cut them a little slack.
Yeah, and I think it increases just understanding and empathy for the fact that this person may look fabulous, but inside there's a battle going on.
That is so important. I'm glad that you brought that up because it is an invisible illness.
Yeah, there's not a bone sticking out or a big tumor on your head.
I'm not going to walk around with a cast for 6 weeks.
Right.
Or once a month I don't wear a funny hat so you can tell that I'm in pain. You know what I mean?
Right.
This is something that you can't see that I'm going through that I don't necessarily want to talk about all the time either.
Right. It involves many of the most private aspects of our life.
Right.
And even with people you love. Most people would just rather not talk about, at that time of the cycle, when I'm in this position, that's really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's just not cocktail conversation for most of us.
And a lot of us are fighting it and trying to do our best, and maybe all that we can do is just our work day.
Right.
And then we come home
and you collapse.
And you collapse and you have to just be done. And
right.
And there has to be a level of respect for that too. And I think it can be hard when you haven't I find I have a lot more empathy for people with other chronic conditions now that I have a name for my own.
Right.
And I think, just understanding that what the person is going through is influencing the rest of their life and kind of what some of those symptoms might be can be really powerful.
Right. So I think that these are things that bringing a person along can help validate and keep track of the information that's coming from the practitioner provider you're seeing, and then also can help provide that information for the person with symptoms. So sometimes they'll go, oh yeah, well, remember after that happened?
Yes.
It's so somebody who knows you, an intimate of some sort, a friend or family member, whatever, can say, oh yeah, well, you remember at the state fair when you had that huge, coney dog and you had an explosive bout of diarrhea after that? Which you don't have to have endometriosis to have at the state fair, at least here in Minnesota.
That's very true.
I love the state fair. Don't get me wrong. I love the state fair.
And we have one of the best in the country.
We do.
I would say, too, along with what you're saying, sometimes when you're the patient, it can get really tired to drive your own care. Right. So if you have an ally there with you, whether it's a family member or a friend or a partner, they can help drive you too. Are you still feeling this way?
Right.
Are you still having this pain? Because, the doctor recommended, and maybe as a patient you're afraid because maybe you don't want to get to the surgery standpoint. Let's just say that that's what you're afraid of. And your friend comes back and they care enough to say, well, are you still having this problem? I've noticed that you've canceled on us, or you don't want to have your birthday party because of this, or, you're not coming out anymore, and I can tell that you're really lethargic. Have you talked about maybe doing the surgery now? Sometimes you really need that ally in your corner to help push you over the finish line.
Yes, I agree.
And my husband was that for me. After a year and a half of, it was like a year into our infertility journey and just all of this pain, he finally said to me in a very nice, but we're both very direct people, so if this sounds rude to you, just know that it was okay for me. He said to me, he's like, I can't listen to you do this anymore. You need to just take some action. I love you. I believe that you're in pain, but fucking do something about it.
Sort of like a poop or get off the pot.
Yes, exactly.
We're talking scatologically.
And I needed that little shove, if you will. Right. And sometimes as a patient, you can get yourself so far, but you need someone to help get you over the finish line a little.
Yep.
And that's where, really talking to your family, getting them on your team, friends, partners, building up an ally and a support network
Yep.
will help you. And guess what? If they're a great person, not only will they help you do that, but they're going to be with you through the whole process of dealing with it.
Right.
And I think that's why, it's so important.
I agree.
Cool.
I agree. This is important stuff.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hegard, again, for all of your
It's so nice
resources.
to talk about this with you.
Well, we'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to connect with us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Endocast. Our theme song is Renegade Energy by Tacky Annie. This is a Matriarch digital media production. Learn more about Matriarch and check out all their great podcasts at matriarchdm.com.